It's
Three,
nice to know
two,
we can
we're live.
Hey, welcome to Tabletop, everybody.
We try to stop laughing.
Yeah.
We're always laughing before the camera comes on, and we're like, oh, stop, be serious.
Yes. We got it under control just in time, which is good.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
We were discussing laptop colors and whether or not Chad's man purse is a satchel or a
Oh,
briefcase.
I can
And
see his
tabletop,
face.
yeah.
Case or satchel would be preferable to man purse.
Attaché,
Yeah.
maybe?
Even attache, it's better than a man purse.
Well, it's got straps.
It's
And a
got
handle.
multiple
It's got
straps.
handles.
Multiple.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so-
it's definitely not a purse.
Should we get Exhibit A or
Here it is.
kind of hold it like this too?
You really do.
Yeah, see, definitely not a purse. Not even close to a purse.
Definitely a briefcase.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But my laptop isn't pink. and that's-
Maybe people should
Do you know someone
comment.
that has a pink laptop?
I do know someone that has a pink laptop.
Give us a like or
Does
subscribe
his
or
name start with a J?
give us a comment
The
if you
person I know
think
with the
that
laptop,
Chad has
his
a
name
purse.
rhymes with Gordon, but I'm not gonna say who
Don't
it
say
is.
Gordon. You know that's a trigger word for him.
So now you know what you miss out on before we actually start the live stream. It's usually pretty important stuff, so,
Life changing.
yeah. How's everybody doing this week? Anything new and exciting to talk about?
Hmm.
I don't know, doing good this week, but I don't know if there's anything new.
It's good. I found out I have my next appointment Tuesday of next week with the actual surgeon. So that feels like progress.
Yeah,
There's
actually.
still another appointment, but
Just to confirm that you understood the last appointment.
that's what the last.
Where they confirmed that you understood the
I feel like they make money every time I come in, maybe, and so.
Be like,
they
you
might
came
be-
back, guys.
But this one is with the guy that's gonna be doing the cutting, so that seems promising. I mean, promising. It seems
Yeah.
like I'm making progress on it, maybe, so that's good. So that was good.
Yeah, good for you.
Yeah, I guess.
I don't have anything that competes with that. Nothing.
Well,
It is a competition, yeah.
so I won. I did.
Do we have any announcements?
For Thursday tonight.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, we're having lasagna tonight, I believe. And Gary mentioned that he is looking for somebody to man the barbecue for the next month. Not
Ooh.
next month, but next third
Do
Thursday.
you have to have a barbecue or we're gonna use those ones?
We
up
have,
front?
we have a Traeger and we have two barbecues up front. They aren't the best, but they would work, but it would be nice to, we used to have some guys that really like to man the grill and we don't seem to have those anymore. So if you're watching and you are a grill master and you've been hiding this from us, now's the time to let us know.
I'm pretty sure that Mr. Hoff is a grill master.
Really?
And Mr. Hoff usually shows up.
Actually, I know he is because I've eaten
So-
some of his stuff.
Mr. Hoff,
Oh.
if you listen.
He has this, he has
Hassling the
this.
Hoff program?
Hasselhoff.
Yeah. Are you waiting for that or like?
The opportunity presented itself.
He has this Mac Daddy grill that has horns on it, if I remember right. It's-
Really?
it's-
Horns?
It's pretty serious.
That sounds
The
demonic.
smoker and then the
It's not
grill.
portable, so you would have to like downgrade to come into our equipment, but
What kind of horns are we talking?
it
Yeah.
seems like the handles or
spear
something like that.
horns or
One of
like
the doors underneath.
Devil
I didn't
horns?
see.
No, bull horns, I could say,
Wow.
it's a smoker, it's a new thing. I could be wrong, I'm pretty sure it
I
had
didn't
one.
see it. I just ate off of it.
Yeah.
And what it did to the meat was not a bad deal.
Yeah,
It was pretty good.
that's good.
Horns or no horns.
Go ahead, Jordan, start us out.
Alright, it's been 4 minutes.
Open
Let's
us in
cut
prayer.
the revelries and good times. Alright, do we pray before we start?
Last week we did not. I
We
noticed
should.
it, But it seems like a good thing.
We have the freedom
Yeah.
to.
Now that I've mentioned it, I can be like, let's not pray, just get it.
Yeah,
over
you don't have to down there.
Ask the Lord to bless this mess is always a good idea.
Brent, will you do the honors?
Father, thank you for just times we can get together and enjoy fellowship, enjoy friendship as well, and laughs. Thank you, Father, for the times we get together and do table talk each week. We ask for your blessing upon this, and even upon the topic that we're talking about right now, as it's really relevant for everything that's going on today, Lord. That you love your church, we love it as well, and we just thank you. We get to just delve into these things in Jesus' name.
All right. Today we're going to talk about success. Essentially, what does a successful church look like? Sometimes we call it a healthy church. How do we gauge that? So yeah, the reason we kind of chose this topic was, you know, we're kind of still in the COVID times. We're still feeling the effects of that, and the church has changed a lot in the last year. I would say, you know, a lot of it's going to live streams, churches kind of embracing the digital space more, and people kind of trying to connect with the church, even in their homes without coming to church, which can be a blessing, and also, you know, sometimes less than a blessing. But
A curse, or just
Yeah.
less, less of a blessing.
I don't know what that means or where it came from, but we'll just go with that. And just thinking about like discussions I've had with people over the last year about the church. Some people seem kind of concerned, right, that numbers are down, not just at this church, but at many churches. Kind of, you know, what does this mean for the church? What does this mean? You know, does this mean Jesus is losing? You know, that kind of stuff, which no one would say, but like, I don't know. I've had some discussions where they seem nervous, like we're losing ground and all that kind of stuff. So it makes me think about how we define success in the church. So for my first question, what are some of the ways that we define success in the church?
I just mentioned this in a sermon a few weeks back, but I think it was Kevin, what's the guy's name? Kevin DeYoung. I stole it from him, but he said the churches often use the triple B method, which is budgets, buildings, and bodies. And that's how we do it. I like Benjamin's budgets, but those are if you try to use something to measure it, those are generally, you know, you got a really nice facility with lots of, you know, fun rides. If you've got more people, then you know where to put, and then if you just have lots of money coming in, you have achieved maximum success in the church, is what most people kind of think.
Yeah. Sounds right.
Well, it does because it's something that you can measure, and that's helpful. You know, I mean, I like to be able to, you know, it's kind of hard to know without being able to measure something, and I think that's what we're going to talk about.
Yeah, there are things that are easily measured,
Right.
for sure. And it can be put on a report at the end of the year, and you know we can measure it against other years and stuff. Any other ones? Actually, I had time to think about this because I prepared it, and I came up with a few that were maybe a little different. Don't look at my notes, Chad.
You're out there for everybody to see.
Any other markers or measures of success that you guys can think of that we've kind of traditionally measured the church with, or
I think in general we approach church kind of with our, you know, American entrepreneurialism. We think that, you know, by all these measures, if it's growing, if attendance is increasing, if the budgets are increasing, if those things are rising, then when we're succeeding, and if those things are shrinking, you know, then if we're not, then I think what we'll see is that that's not really God measure success in the church. But we kind of bring just this idea of entrepreneurial, like the way that you build a business is the way that you build a church.
yes,
Which is where we get our term that we often use now, corporate, that most churches are like going after a corporate type model and mindset or strategy when it comes to doing church and building a church. It's corporate, professional.
Pastorpreneur is a term that I've seen that, you know, online. Like, it's sad that that's a term, but it is.
what does that mean?
Like entrepreneurial
manure,
pastor.
Manure.
Pastorpreneur.
Oh.
There's an expectation that pastors, you know, act as a CEO of something, and it's their job to drive growth. And that's not necessarily what the Bible.
There's actually, like, I haven't seen it a lot, there's a guy that we know, we won't name any names of churches, but he put out like an annual report every year, and he put it on Facebook, and it would show like, you know, Sunday school attendance year over year, and baptism year over year, and it laid it out like you would take it into a board meeting.
You know,
And
a shareholders meeting.
Yeah, it's exactly what it looked like. It was weird, like, that's how you would measure, you know, year over year, we've shown growth in this area. You know, you can picture like graphs, charts, and that's how they measure it. And when you, especially if you're in a position as a senior pastor where you've got to justify your job, your pay, and things like that, that's the kinds of stuff you'd have to bring in.
Yeah, I thought of one that was a little bit different, maybe a little bit odd. Those are definitely the main ones. One I thought about was community services, right? Like, I went to a church in Yuma where and this isn't like a bad thing. Like, it's good to let people know like how many meals are given out or how many like you know, contacts with the homeless people had, or like those kinds of things. Like, it's good that these things can be an encouragement. If we're going to talk about like our numbers bad or whatever, but a little bit later. But that was another one, like community services. How many meals were donated? How many, you know, hospital visits occurred? All these things. Like, we try to find a way to like put a number on everything. Which again, it isn't necessarily bad. It's a way that we're measuring success in the church. Another one I thought was a little bit maybe different too is like political influence, right? Like, how are we influencing, not like political necessarily like on a national scale, but how are we influencing like the community around us for what we want to see in our community, which I thought was kind of interesting. I've heard churches, you know, also try to gauge that, which is a little bit harder to put a number on per se.
What about how many thumbs up you get on your tabletop? YouTube videos.
What's our max? Like
How
4?
many stars you have on your Google review for your church?
We actually have been rated on Google.
Yeah.
And it
First
hasn't all
world
been
problem.
good.
Not all of it's been good. I think we're rocking about a 4.7 right now, which isn't bad.
We need to raise money to remove some of the bad ones.
Yeah, that's probably not gonna be. That is something though you do. You can't help but look at like how many sermons have been listened to, how many YouTube, you know, who's tuned in for live stream. Those are all things you see. Like if the week that you lead, you know, table talk, there's only, you know, it's down halfway. You know, those are kind of
Right,
things that
gets in your head.
Well, it's even one, I mean, this stuff's natural, right? Like the first thing we do, if you didn't know, all the pastors debrief on Sunday afternoons after church service because of the 2 locations. And so the debrief is, how did things go in each location? You know, it's informational for those who weren't at the other location. And that's almost always the first question we ask, right? It's like, how did it look today? Was it full? Was it light? And I don't think we mean anything like bad by that. But it's definitely something that is on the radar. Yeah, like it means something to us. Right?
Well, I think that's what we're going to get into. But obviously,
Yeah.
people coming to church regularly that's a sign of something. You know? So it's
Sure.
not so much the
True.
you know, the
True.
maximum number, you know.
Right.
I remember even in, like, growing up in the church, when I was 19, first church I started going to, I was chart on the wall
I was
to
just
show,
thinking about that.
you know, record attendance, this week's attendance, or last week's attendance. I mean, it had like this thing where you were always trying to hit, you know, break the record.
Right, last week's giving and this week's
Yeah,
giving.
it was
joint
always right there on the
So our
wall.
church growing up was the same way. That was the first thing in the bulletin was all the stats from the week before.
Yeah.
So that everybody could feel bad about, you know, not bringing enough neighbors this week, or it's like we gotta up our game.
Give more this week. than
And
we
so
did
they would
last
make sure they
week.
put it in the face of the congregation.
Yeah, the giving was in there too.
The giving,
like weekly giving.
always,
Yeah.
always.
Yeah, I haven't thought about this in a while. That's a little weird.
And that was normal in the church that I grew up in, and probably normal in most churches back then. That was the way.
It's probably motivational in some sense to where you will,
For sure.
you know, you strive to do better. in
Well,
that regard. So
it does something.
you know.
Otherwise, they wouldn't be putting it in there. It's intentional. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we can measure success. I don't know if you have this on your list, but just like as we think about how things went, like, you know, were there any, you know, technical moves today, or, you know, how was the music, and, you know, did things happen when they were supposed to happen? You know, we can measure success by, yeah, it wasn't a good day today because there was feedback, or, you know, the mics didn't
That's a
work.
good
or,
one.
you know,
Which again
whatever.
would go under professionalism.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
the professionalism that, you know, the mindset that we have
Right.
towards what it is we're doing.
And the
So the
programs.
greatest goal is that everything's done flawlessly, right? Which I've
Right.
been in one of those churches.
Yeah.
And just in case people don't know, that is not the greatest goal of the church is, which we'll talk about.
Yeah, so numbers tell us something, right? They're not bad. Like we ask every Sunday how many people are in Lahain, how many people in 3R. Half the time we're like, I don't know, I didn't count. Or, like, I don't know, one person said this number, another person said this number. But yeah, they tell us something. Like, it's certainly not wrong to track the numbers. What can't numbers tell us? Like, what's the problem with using that as your measure of success?
Let's see.
I don't know. Like, I didn't know it was going to stump people.
I think it depends on, you know, how is it that you're trying to draw a crowd? And so, you know, if you're a, you know, what we might call more of like a seeker-sensitive kind of church, like you put on the show, the numbers would tell you that you're putting on a good show or a bad show, depending on how people show up. You know, in our case, where, you know, we're not trying to put on a show, like, obviously the more people that come, the better. But the numbers can't tell us like, you know, how disciples are being made. The numbers, you know, can't tell us the spiritual impact of sermons and fellowship and singing and those kinds of things.
Can't tell you what's going on inside the lives of those people.
Right.
It just tells you that people are showing up. But I think anytime we see that people are showing up, we go, God's doing something right now. He may be, but that's not always true. It could just be that for whatever reason, and there's a lot of them, which I don't know if you're gonna, there's a lot of ways to grow a church. It just tells you that something's going on. It doesn't mean that the Holy Spirit's like actively engaging and transforming.
So we'll probably get into this, like you have to define success in the conversation. But
Now we're all
Well, like,
scared.
what do you do
We're
now?
all scared
You know,
now.
if you're
Like,
this
jump
now.
in it.
No, yeah. So numbers tell us something, but they don't tell us everything. Basically, is kind of what I just want to make sure is said, because it's not wrong to track those things, of course.
Well, I would even say some of the churches that have the greatest numbers, you know, the greatest buildings, the greatest budgets, and the greatest bodies, and a number of bodies, that's not a word. but they are probably healthy and fit too. Probably would get an F on the report card from Jesus, and that was why I brought that up. It was actually the church of Sardis that, you know, everybody around them said, yeah, these guys are awesome, these guys are successful, and they got an F on the report card. So that doesn't guarantee success.
Well, we just saw the other night, we watched the American Gospel again with the young adults. And there's something that all of the false churches that are bringing forth the false gospel have in common. And that is that they are stacked. They are packed with people. They are drawing the biggest crowds. They're filling the biggest arenas. They have the biggest joints that they're meeting in. And so, I mean, just even looking at that, it's like, what does that tell you? And it doesn't mean that all big churches are false gospel churches or not doing the work of God. But there is a commonality among, it's just good to know, among churches that are preaching false gospels, is they're bringing people.
I saw a graphic a couple of weeks, I think I might have shared it with you guys, it was from Barna or Pew, one of the big research firms. Anyway, it was a pie chart that talked about, they surveyed people about, do you know what the Great Commission is? And in this pie chart, I think it was only 17% of people that they surveyed had heard of the Great Commission and know what it is. The rest of the pie chart was, you know, people that have heard of it but don't know what it is, and the people that have never heard of it. But it was only 17% of Christians that were surveyed knew what the Great Commission
Yeah,
was.
the churchgoers, and the biggest color in the pie chart was people that didn't have any idea what it was.
Yeah, that means that there's a lot of unsuccessful churches.
Yeah, it's like, who are they interviewing? I get so wrapped up in like, how do they do this well?
I've never gotten one. I've never gotten one of those things in the mail to like respond. So yeah, I'm like the same way.
Yeah,
Like,
like, how does
who
this guy
are
trust
they?
this? Does this mean anything? Like, it's depressing that like,
But from the amount of people that call themselves Christians that I have interacted with in my
Sure.
life, I would say that's a true pie chart.
Right.
They don't
It's
know.
sad.
Yeah, they don't.
let's go to Matthew 16 here. Alright. Matthew 16, 13 to 18. Can someone with an approved translation read that?
I'm CSB today, so I can't.
Is that allowed? Chad, you want
Well,
to
you're right, I guess it's you.
Well,
ESV for the record. This is not gonna be 13 to 18, is what you
Yes.
said? Now when Jesus came to the district of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say that the Son of Man is? And they said, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and others Jeremiah, or one of the prophets. He said to them, but who do you say that I am? Simon Peter replied, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus answered him, blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood have not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven. But I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it.
So I wanted to kind of pivot here from a discussion about success to essentially look at Christ's words, kind of the institution a little bit of the church, and consider what Christ says about his church. So, what is the church being built on? The papacy?
Jesus.
Where are we going?
Jesus Christ, the rock.
How do we know that?
Well, I believe that's what he says in this passage.
How do you know it's not the Pope?
Well, I think he's saying, Peter, you're like a little stone, you're a little rock. But upon this rock, which is a sizable chunk of stone, I will build my church. So he's making a distinction between Peter, who's the chip off the old block, if you will, and Jesus, who is the actual rock that he's building the church from. Is that what you were looking for?
Sure. I warned these guys about jumping ahead today, so they're all scared to answer
Right.
every question I have.
He said he would close his
It's-
Bible and walk
it's
off.
Firing on today.
Part of me kind of wants to see that if that actually happens.
No, don't do that. So this is a simple question, but who will build his church?
I feel like I'm in Sunday school.
Go ahead.
Jesus.
Okay, and whose church is it?
Jesus.
Yes.
Okay.
What's Jesus?
Why is that important? Like it's it's right there in the text, but why is that important? As we think about success in the church.
And there's never a time when Jesus is not successful, does not accomplish what he wants to accomplish. And I think that's everything. The fact that he will not fail, cannot fail, means that his church will not fail, cannot fail. If it was founded on anything other than we get trouble.
And then even the gates of Hades won't prevail against it, which is just awesome.
That would have said the NIV.
Dang it, Chad.
Mine says hell.
Hold up. Where'd it go? It says Hades, dude. What does yours say, Brent?
The standard, the CSB says Hades also.
In all fairness, there's some.
They are.
Hades is more literal,
I don't know
maybe?
what's going on.
You were really.
It's a weird day today. Okay. Man, alright, let's talk about success.
Well, maybe we need to jump off of Brent's point. I think if the success of the church is tied to Jesus, and I think that when the church is apparently not succeeding, that it really is. In the end, the church is gonna, nothing's gonna prevail against the church. And so even now, as maybe we see like numbers just across the board shrinking, there was a study that came out not long ago that there are now more people that don't go to church than do go to church for the first time, since they've been tracking that kind of thing. It's like, over 50% of people don't claim any affiliation in kind of a church or organized religion. And it's never been that in America before. And that a lot of people look at that and say, well, that's a failure. But, Jesus tells us that nothing's going to prevail against the church. And so in apparent failure with Jesus, like there's still success because Jesus is the one who's building the church.
I would actually, I agree with you, but I would say that when we do see churches closing the doors and folding and things like that,
That's Jesus too.
Right.
because there's also times where we can just going through the 7 letters where he pulls these lampstands and turns the lights out. And sometimes that isn't the church failing, that's Jesus protecting the purity of his church. Right? And so there are churches whose doors should close and they should never reopen because they aren't teaching the gospel, they're teaching something other than Christ crucified. And so those churches, if we start to see half of the people, half these churches go away, that's not necessarily bad.
Right.
But the true church will prevail, and that's important.
And there's a time and a place, like Jesus does things at different times for different purposes, right? He's always rearranging, moving things around, adjusting stuff. So like all of those churches in the book of Revelation, like out of all 7 of them, none of them exist. A couple of them are really good churches with really good things to say, right? Where did they go? Well, it wasn't just because he was not pleased with them or they weren't preaching the gospel. It was just because through time, regions change, places change. And it doesn't mean that those are lost components to his kingdom. It just means that they look like something else somewhere else right now. They just get moved around. And we see the same thing, when people leave, we take it personal first. We get hurt, we lose some sleep. And then we go, this is Jesus' church, not ours. And he's going to move people around for different reasons at different times. And that's his business.
Yeah. The funny thing is, when the doors started, we were recipients of that. We had some people come from other places that came here to serve and to help our body, and
For
it
sure.
was a blessing, so.
Yeah, they left a church that didn't want to see them
Right.
go to come and help a new work, you know, and that's just rad stuff. CBC was the same way. The church that sent us, Community Bible Church, they didn't want to see any of the families go that went, which only a couple did. They didn't want to break the family apart, so to speak. But what came out of it afterward, I mean, I think everyone got it. There was no mistake that this is Jesus building his kingdom, and it's right.
Amen. Yeah, I think sometimes we get the idea that like it's on us to build the church,
Mhm.
like both in terms of growth, and just like I don't know, it's our responsibility, and I don't know what I'm trying to say.
Well, the truth is, and this is kind of sad, that you can build a big church. I mean, we've seen people, you can come in with a lot of money and a great marketing campaign and a great social media presence, and you can build a large, successful looking church. And it doesn't mean that it's something that God's happy about or pleased with. I mean, so if we put
Just put some stormtroopers up on stage and
Yeah.
or have the pastor come out, like, what did he do, zip line from the sound booth down to the stage? I mean,
It's a real thing.
and if you just step that up every week,
Yeah.
then you're gonna have more people every week.
Right.
And oftentimes what you end up doing in the churches, what kind of famous for it, unfortunately, is you can draw every Christian from every other church
Yeah.
to yours, and it looks like growth,
Yeah.
but what have you done?
Yeah.
And it's,
I think that's the thing that if I'm gonna be honest, bothers me the most, is that you've got Christians that buy into, that actually endorse and support that type of a strategy. They should know better.
Yeah.
But a lot of them.
it baffles me sometimes, and we've seen this, this last year, some of the people that have moved on and gone away. It's like this was a family that you were a part of, that you served in, and you ministered to, and were, back and forth, and to be able to walk away from it, like, it just because,
Yeah.
whether, and I'm not singling anybody out, but sometimes it's the piddly things, it's not about the teaching or something like that, it's secondary things that people leave for. And it's weird to me, that there's not more commitment and more stick-to-itiveness.
Yeah, it's a weird landscape today where you can just go down the road to another church.
Yeah.
And sometimes as people leave, even a small group in the church leaves, like it has an effect where and almost other people kind of get sucked out too at the same time. And like, I don't know, like I was thinking about this today, and like, it doesn't feel fun to be part of a church that's like shrinking in size. Like it's like I know my Bible, I know what I believe, I know that like that's not, it doesn't mean the church is failing because it's shrinking, which I don't know if it's whatever, but I don't know. It's one marker of things, one measurement, but it can't tell you a lot of things, so.
Well, and I think what you just pointed out, the fact that we have so many churches all over the place, almost on every street corner, like, doesn't help why we do this, why we all look at something to measure success the way we do. Because you've got so many of them, it's just easy to see who's doing it better. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like, and we're looking at the wrong things, but those are the things we're looking at because there's so many options.
Yeah.
Then it becomes like, yeah, who's figured it out? Who's just doing it better? And
If you go to a conference, it's like, oh, where'd you go to school? I'm like, oh, church. Like, I would often hear those things. It's like, oh, what size congregation do you have? It's like, oh, that's like, that'll tell you everything you need to know about me.
You're not supposed to ask that. If you go to a pastor's
Really?
conference or something, you don't, that's something you never ask.
You used to.
I didn't know that.
I didn't know that.
Which
I
conference
broke that rule
Yeah.
with Gary Dozier the first
Yeah.
time I ever talked to him at a conference. We were like in the back, like awkwardly standing there, and I'm like kicking a rock, and I'm like, so how big's your church? Like that. And he would just kind of like looked at me like, and then I knew like that was off limits. Like, you don't do that.
Yeah, it's almost,
Wow.
it's like really taboo.
I didn't know that. We used to ask at the conferences I was going to.
No, you don't ask.
I think it depends on what circles
Don't
you run.
tell.
In some circles that matters, some circles.
Well, I think that people want to ask and want to know. It's not that they don't. It's just that again,
Just get one of their bulletins.
because of what we're
Right.
talking about, you don't ask. So let me ask you this, because I'm not trying to hide
Go
anything.
ahead.
you talked about
I need some
shrinking,
help today.
the church shrinking.
Yeah.
And right now, you know, somebody could come into the door in Lapine, the door at Three Rivers and say, you guys shrunk over the last year, and we have. Are you discouraged or encouraged by that? And why?
Both. Encouraged? Here's what I'll say.
I would say I am. I have a pep in my step right now in many ways, and I am encouraged. So, yeah.
I would say a little discouraged because that means that people who are part of this in our family, who were, you know, we were walking together in this direction, you know, part of the same ship or whatever, are now not there. And there are various reasons, and that's, you know, everybody's story is different, you know, or whatever, but like some of those people just are not part of a church anymore. Like I know that. So that's a little discouraging because I've been talking to Marcy about this, like I get excited when I come to church and I see people, even that I've never had a chance to talk to. Like it makes me, whether they're new or they've been there a year, sometimes I don't know, but like it matters to me that we have, you know, a group together here to worship God together and hear the gospel preached. Like that's exciting to me. It builds my faith, even if, you know, I don't have a deep relationship with every single person. But one thing I'll say that I've really been kind of thinking about this last week, is in Lapine, like, we had like 31 people there on Sunday, you know? I don't think I counted myself, maybe 32, like, and I remember, like, I counted during the service, because I was sitting in the back and I was thinking about, I was like, how many people are here today? I count 31, right? And I didn't think much about it. I wasn't, like, depressed or anything. I just thought, you know, like, that's a smaller number than, you know, a year ago. And I just said, okay, like, whatever. And then at lunch, I'm sitting there and I'm like, dang, dude, it seems like everybody is here. And I do a count, and there's 31 people there. Like, I can't think of, maybe someone left, but like, if someone left, it was like one person. And what's happening, like, around the tables, you know, like, I'm sitting there with a woman who's, you know, asking me about something in the sermon, and just, she was feeling kind of the weight of sin and a frustration that even as a Christian, she would continue to sin, and she was feeling like guilty and upset about it, and wondering why, like, as a Christian, she would continue to sin. It's like, okay, I got to go, you know, let me see your Bible. My Bible was over by the projector, and I said, let me see your Bible, and we got to, you know, open it up together and to read from 1 Peter, just about God shielding us with his power, and just that God is responsible for our salvation and our sanctification, all these things. It was like this amazing gospel conversation. It's like, that was so cool.
As you're having a meal.
As we're having a meal, it's like, it was just awesome. Like, I was like, you know what, like, it's harder to measure stuff like that in gospel conversations. Like, I don't know how we would put that number on the board, but I don't know, it reminded me of what's really important.
So I feel the exact same way to speak into this, because I was kind of the guy responsible that went down to, you know, plant Lapine. Chad, of course, you were already there. But I put that on myself. I'm supposed to be the church planner. You go down, you start, and then a year later you have half the numbers that you started with. And so I'm the one who's looking at myself and going and asking questions. Well, what's wrong with you? Be like, what aren't you doing right? Because I'm not seeing that measure of success. And so there was a lot of discouragement coming out of COVID for me, with some of the people that left, some of the people that were core group that actually came down to be a part of the church plant that walked away. I take all that personal because I'm measuring my own success by that. And then I'm doing the same thing. This is how it's gone from discouragement to encouragement, because I'm encouraged right now. And that's the reason why. And I think this is what numbers can never, this is why they're not accurate, one reason, and why they can never be the answer, is because you lose stuff like that. You lose being able to sit afterwards and have a meal together. You lose the type of bond and community and family that's being developed right now in Lapine. And so I've gone from going, oh my goodness, like, we suck and other churches are better because people are leaving. Now I'm going, oh, like, I see what you're doing right now, God.
Right.
Like, there's real stuff going on here. You're really being found here. You're really active and activating people here. Like, my thinking's completely different, and it really comes down to how we define success. Right. And so it's funny because I'm just going to keep talking. I had this story of I was invited 2 years ago to speak at a conference for a bunch of pastors, like from the northern United States, that are parts of small churches. So they're pastors that are worn down and discouraged and basically doing the what's wrong with me thing. And I was asked to come in and kind of do like the main Friday night thing. And I'm thinking, like, how do I approach this? Like, what text do I pull? What do I talk about to talk to a room full of, like, you know, small church pastors and try to encourage them? And my first pastor, Dan Dillard, when I was a young Christian, was there, and he's local, small church. So back in 1993, when we moved up, that was the first church we went to. He was established. There were other big churches in Central Oregon and in Bend all around him that have come and gone over the years, and over the years, he really hasn't grown. He's just kind of maintained this small church. And so what I ended up doing was speaking to his influence on my life with that I went there, and even though the church was small and not sexy and not exciting and not cutting edge, and it never has been, I learned what gospel word is and what gospel community is. And because of that, I have come out of there as a church planner, as a pastor, as a dude that loves the word, as a dude that loves the gospel, as a dude that loves other people, and all that was a direct result of what this dude was building. And so the whole point to these guys was, you know, success isn't measured by how many people are in your building. It's measured by what's going on in the people that are in your building, even if that's a small amount. And it was rad. I still am in contact with some of those guys because it was so encouraging for them to just be reinforced with the reality of that. And we all do too, because I'll go back and forth constantly. I'll constantly beat myself up because I'm measuring it wrong. But at the end of the day, I end up coming back to Matthew 16 and words like that, where it's like, oh, you're like, it may not look right to the world, but it's all looking right to you. Like, you know exactly what you're doing. So,
Well, it's funny that you talked about you know, went to La Pine, put that pressure on yourself, and you don't see it growing. Well, when you went to La Pine, I'm here,
Yeah.
Rivers mostly, and I'm watching it go down and thinking, oh, this is my fault. You know,
Right.
So you do the same thing, regardless
Right.
of where you go, you do.
Right.
This
You feel
is what
responsible.
do. And you feel responsible, and you think, you know, I'm the one that's tanking this thing, and that's right, you know, the numbers.
and what's funny is we know it's bad theology,
We do.
but we do it to
That doesn't
ourselves
stop
anyway.
us.
We do, and I mean, you know, it's just one of those things we have to be careful of. But then when I step back and look, I think, although we have lost some people, and it's just the people that are here now,
Exactly.
and we've gained quite a few as well. But I see this desperation for Christ in the
Right.
people that are here. I don't see a fringe Christianity. You know, I've got my life, I've got this thing that I'll come and do. I see people here that are coming because they need to hear the gospel every week. They're desperate for Christ, and they need the hope of Him, and that's why they're here right now. And so there's this kind of sweet unity in spirit, even though it's a smaller group, that is really refreshing and
Very much so.
a much more unified kind of body right now and tight knit. And I'm seeing just lots of tight relationships forming and growing. And
Well, that's been our
all
encouragement,
these
right?
things.
Is that in both locations, that's what we're seeing.
Absolutely.
We're seeing this thing where a lot of the people that maybe looked at it more as social hour once a week, like that spills over when you have a bunch of those people in your congregation. You become nominal. Like their mediocre Christianity spills onto the rest of the room. And so as I think we've seen, and this isn't everybody or anyone in specific, but as we've seen some of that disappear because they haven't gotten what they wanted, we have seen a tightening, like a calibration of people that are, like you said, desperate for Jesus. They're not just coming to check the box every week, because that's what a Christian does. They're coming because they want to know Him more, and they want to be more like Him. And there's a hunger, man. There's a good thing happening right now, and that's not because numbers have gone up. It's actually in spite of numbers going down. There's a good thing happening.
Well, we used to also see, like, we always used to joke that if everybody that called the door of their home showed up on the same Sunday, we'd have, 300 people here. But it never worked out that way. We'd always have, they'd come once a month and then somebody else would come. So it was always this kind of, it was a very different crowd every week. Part of that's the summertime and the area we live. But it doesn't, right now, we're seeing the same people pretty much week in, week out, faithful, committed, showing up. And that's a cool thing.
Yeah. And it has re-energized us. I think we would want to make sure we say that to whoever's watching. Like, the way you guys are pressing in energizes us for more ministry and for better ministry. So Yeah, it's been a cool thing.
And that's a perfect example of something that, depending on your perspective, you could look at the dropping of numbers as a failure, but we're sitting here saying like there's a success that's happening.
That's exactly what it is.
That's harder to measure, right? And by the things that we would measure, maybe we would call it a success, but by the things that you can't measure,
Yeah.
it is a success. I think of like, the prophet Jeremiah, like his ministry, like there wasn't a whole lot to measure with what Jeremiah did, but at the onset of his ministry, God told him, go where I tell you to go and say what I tell you to say. And Jeremiah's success is that he went where God told him to go and said what God told him to say. And beyond that, like the measure of the success of it is on God's shoulders, not on ours. And so you said, gospel word, gospel community, as long as we're fostering those things,
Yeah.
we're being successful in what God has called us to do, and the numbers are gonna rise and fall or ebb and flow or whatever they do. But the success is that we're doing what God has given us to do. The results of it really.
That's a good point. Like, we see that in Acts, right? Paul's going around proclaiming the gospel in different areas. Some places a church is born, some places he's literally like beaten and dragged from the town. So like, the success is in the proclamation of the gospel, which I think is something that, we have here and is important to us. As you guys are talking, one of the things I kind of thought about was like, just how having smaller numbers has allowed and even given the impulse to people to step up and serve, right? Like how many people have started pressing in and engaging and serving more in the last year? Like that's been kind of encouraging to me as well. People are maybe more on the fringe or whatever pressing in, so that's been kind of cool.
They're actually manning their stations.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. This quote is funny. I had 2 quotes come down this morning from just stuff I was feeding through that had directly to do with this. One's out of Peyton's new book's out, by the way, Church Plantology. So don't know if you'll probably be getting a copy of that. But it says if success is measured by filling a room, then we're not defining it the way that Jesus and Paul did, which just goes back to what you guys were talking about. Because there's times he would go into a place and it was a complete failure as far as man's perspective, but not as far as what the Lord was actually doing, in that place and in Paul. So they never really messed with the numbers game too much. Either of those, the guys that the church was built on, So, and then Martin Lloyd-Jones, had another one that I saw this morning. It says God has always done His greatest work through a remnant, so get rid of the notion of numbers. And like I know that's true. It's just hard to do.
Right.
When you feel responsible. It's hard to get rid of that, but I like that just straight out. Like it's always about, what God's doing behind the scenes, the remnant. And actually, we were having this conversation the other day at Bring It Up about what we think about revivals and just people's idea of revival. And actually, that's kind of what it brought to mind, because we see that as a evangelistic success when we see revival take place, when we see huge numbers at an event or something. But we don't pay any attention to the success of the dude that's been trying to win his neighbor for 3 years and then does. You know what I mean? And so we just look at things so wrong.
In thinking about success, and I'm kind of a cynical person in general. No, it's true. But I'm always surprised when somebody comes to the church and then comes back.
Yeah.
And that sounds weird, but we don't have.
Even when they leave in the middle of a sermon.
Well, even then, yeah. But we don't have all these bells and whistles, this great program, this great show. There's no fog lights, there's no laser show, there's no, we don't have stormtroopers, we don't have zip lines, we don't have anything cool going on. We literally have a pretty genuine group of people that are kind of open and real, and we preach Jesus faithfully. We preach through His Word faithfully, all of it, the stuff people want to hear and the stuff people don't want to hear. And that's not generally going to attract a large crowd.
Right. And we've set it up that way intentionally, right?
Yeah.
But I mean, for one reason, so that we don't get yelled at when we get home to Dad.
Right.
But the other reason is so that when someone does return, we know there's a good chance that God's up to something. We don't know what it is. We don't know what's going to come out of it. But we know that God's up to something rather than it being one of 50 other things, right? So
yeah,
it's helpful.
Saying what you win them with is what you win them to. And
Yeah.
so if you win them with energy and excitement, and it's always turned up to 11, you have to keep that pace up, or you're going to lose people.
Right.
And so when we strip everything back and say, what's the most important thing for somebody to experience at the door on a Sunday morning? We want them to hear the gospel. We want them to hear about Jesus.
An authentic gospel in an authentic way.
Yeah.
With
And
no
if that
lip
draws
stick.
people in,
Yeah.
then great. And if it turns people away, there's, what else can we give and what else
Right.
can we be doing? And so at the end of the day, we know that what we're doing is the right thing.
Yep.
And, could we have better this, better that? Sure. And there may be a day when those things do, some things improve. I'm sure people can nitpick some stuff. But at the end of the day, that's the best thing we've got to offer people, and that's what we do.
Right.
And I'm happy about that. I wouldn't really want to, be something other than that. So I don't think that's ever going to grow a giant, massive crowd. I really don't.
Yeah.
Well, we were even talking, this actually has nothing to do with what you just said, but we were even talking the other day in our own context about like our church, because I had a comment made to me last week about, it was someone who was encouraging me, and it was a neat encouragement, just a really, cool heart of encouragement, but it was like, don't worry, like, one of these days you guys are just gonna break through the ceiling and people are gonna figure out, how rad you are, and you're gonna grow. I mean, that's paraphrased.
Right.
But the whole premise of the thinking was wrong, is that's everything to us. If that's the goal, is that we just want this thing to really take off. We are in an area that we're never going to have a big church, population-wise. We're not in a city, we're not in a metro area, there's not a ton of we're not in the middle of a sea of population, And so this is meant to be whatever size it's supposed to be. It's never supposed to be something that's big. And of course, on top of the fact that we, everything's laid on the foundation of the gospel, and we're born. But yeah.
Well, and that could be, and this sounds weird, but that could be maybe the worst thing that could happen to us in some ways. I mean, the idea that we would get to 300 or 400 people, that could be devastating to the church. And we actually watched that early on. When we started out, we were at 50, 80, in those numbers. It was a very different vibe, you kind of knew everybody, you kept track of people better. When we got closer to 150 to 200, it was harder to keep track of what was going on.
You lose
Changes things.
what Jordan shared happened last Sunday with me that day.
Absolutely.
You-
And that's
you
why,
lose it. And this goes into church planting,
Yeah.
or church growth,
Right.
which I think we're gonna get to maybe next week or whatever, kind of different subject, but this is one of the reasons why you try to keep things manageable, because if you don't, you will lose stuff that just matters to the church.
At the end of the day, God's growth plan for the church is evangelism and discipleship. I mean, it's just that simple. Evangelize the lost and disciple, those who have come in faith. And those things you can measure those. I mean, you can measure evangelism, I guess, easier than you can measure discipleship. But they're hard things, to quantify. We like to be able to quantify things, but God's plan is pretty simple. Maybe difficult to do, but not hard to understand, what the plan is.
Yeah, it is difficult to measure, discipleship or evangelism. I think one of the ways to do that is through stories, right? Like how I love praise and prayer. I love hearing stories about people, even the ones where it's like they had a health issue and they, at first they were thinking wrongly or, fleshly or whatever about it. And then over time, God showed them, His will for them or whatever. It's awesome to hear how the gospel is impacting people's lives at the door and out there. It's one of the, my favorite things during praise and prayer is the stories, which there's other places too. Sometimes they're really long, sometimes they're 10 minutes long. I want to name names, so I'm not going to.
and we don't encourage that.
We don't encourage that. But it's good to find opportunities outside of it, whether at lunch in La Pine or just grabbing someone after church. I think some of the things I can rush to talk about after church aren't worth talking about. But what is worth talking about is the gospel's effect on my lives and the lives of people around me. I think I would encourage people to find ways to share their story. Which sometimes is a testimony, but when we think of that, we think of when Christ saved us, when we a salvation moment, or so to speak. But also what in the last week, in the last month, what has it meant to you to follow Christ? How have you grown in your relationship with Him?
So, I have a question. What is a successful church?
Jim?
a big church is a successful church. But I think a successful church is a church that proclaims the gospel.
Yeah.
Gospel word, gospel community, go back to what you said.
Yeah.
And again, those things are hard to measure, but that's the success of the church.
I think, yeah, the idea that,
So it has nothing to do with money.
I mean, numbers can be a factor. They can tell you something and they can tell you nothing. That's just the reality of it. But the idea that we would be faithful to proclaim the person and work of Christ, and then that we would actively that would play out in a loving, the way we work together as a church. That there's a lot of love and community. To me, those are
Which is basically disciple making.
Yeah, if you look at what was important to Jesus, it's that that His name is lifted high, proclaimed, and that His people love one another, and then that pours out in the community around us in a way that is, that's it. It's so funny what people look at as far as whether it's music or excitement, it's tongues and healing and the things that are drawing people into these churches sometimes. It's like, man, just love each other, make much of Christ and His work, and love God and love people around you really well.
Jesus says to Peter, like, who do you say? And he says, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And Jesus says, well, this wasn't revealed to you by man, it was revealed to you like by your Father in heaven. It's like, if we can get that right, like, make much of Christ, like you're saying, like, Christ will build His church. And that's a promise I think we need to hear again and again.
My mind goes, when you say that, to like Acts chapter 2, where the church was doing what you're talking about, proclaiming Christ and loving one another. And it was kind of a unique time in church history. I don't think this is a prescription that it's going to happen this way every time, but Acts chapter 2 talks about how the church at that time had favor with both God and with people, that God was drawing. Like outsiders were looking at the church saying, I don't know what's going on there, but I need to go check it out and be a part of it, and God was adding to the number. And like I said, I don't think that's a prescription that, if we get it exactly right, that's going to happen every time.
You don't want to sell your house and lay it at my feet?
No,
Lay it at my feet?
well, but there's something about, gospel word, gospel community that God uses that to draw people in.
And it actually matters even more, I would argue, in like the communities we find each of our locations in. They're small communities, not big.
Yeah.
When something goes down, when someone gets help, or when something goes wrong and sideways, the community hears about it. Like that wave moves pretty fast, and so we can have just such a major impact in so many ways with what we're doing in right now.
I would just encourage people that are tuning in. If there's people out there that have been missing and you've noticed them, reach out to them, let them know that they're missed. I think that's something we all need to take ownership of. I know.
Well, run their names by us first.
Yeah. We obviously try to do that, but it's funny how everybody wants that when they're missing or when they've gone away to some degree. They want people to notice that they're gone and for it to matter. But it doesn't seem to always motivate us to do the same for others. And I'm just, it's something that if you've noticed somebody's been missing for a time now, reach out to them, let them know. Maybe it'll draw them back, maybe it won't. Not everybody that leaves is, it's not always a bad thing. Sometimes they're supposed to leave. Not the church, but the local church to a different church, or whatever. So, but we just had a family just reach out to us and let us know that they found a church in Bend that they're going to. They live in Bend already, and that, they're in a good church.
Yep.
That's a good thing. We're going to miss them, but that's okay.
Yep.
So, but check in on people.
This was going to be one of our shorter discussions.
That's all I got.
Amen. Let's pray. Who would like to pray?
Go for it.
I'll pray. Lord God, we thank you for gathering us together in a church. Lord, we thank you for the place we find ourselves living, in the community that you've gathered around us here. Help us to value what we have here. Help us to appreciate your gospel and your truth, and to share that with others. Help us to measure things the way you would measure things, Lord, and not get caught up in numbers or worldly measurements, but to be concerned mostly with the gospel and sharing that with other people. In Jesus' name we pray, amen.
Amen. Thanks for tuning in.
See you tonight, men.